It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on everything. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one kettle. It's the same sunshine, it's the same rain, the same struggle just to maintain. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one kettle.
Great day and welcome to another episode of Discussions with Indigenous Education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian. I'd like to welcome our co-host and my mother, Renee Sanders, also known as Red Silver Fox.
Greetings, everyone.
I'm your co-host, Tavis Sanders, also known as Red Tailhawk. And today's discussion is going to move forward and we're going to discuss stage 4 today, which is discrimination. And so if you've been watching the show so far, we've gone over classification, symbolization, and dehumanization as part of the stages of genocide. And right here, I want to acknowledge that it used to be 8 stages of genocide. They added 2 stages, and so sometimes I'll say stage 4 because, you know, it is, but we're concentrating on stage 4 today, which is discrimination. And we hope that you've learned a lot from what we've discussed so far, right? And so, let's first, before we get into it, let's discuss the actual, the definition of the stage of genocide called discrimination, and then we can go into it a little bit further.
Okay, all right. Well, discrimination is a dominant group uses laws, customs, and political power to deny the rights of other people or other groups. The powerless group may not be granted full civil rights or even citizenship.
Okay, so we're going to have to just stop here already, right? Now, granted, there is a lot more if they wanted to review the stages of genocide and review discrimination. It's a lot, and it's too much for us, in this limited amount of time that we have to read the whole thing. But that actually is enough for us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it's enough for us because we already have to stop. We have to go back, and we're going to have to find out what the definitions are for a few of these terms that they used in this description.
Right, again, because they say that they use laws, they use customs, and they use political power.
All right, right. And while we think that we may know what the definition of those terms are, we really need to find out what the definition of these terms are to this, with respect to the actual convention itself and the stages, because their legal definition may differ from our social definition. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think before we even move forward into how discrimination is used as the stage of genocide, we need to go through what a law is, what the customs are, and what political power is, so we can really understand what they just said.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, well, law.
Okay.
Well, we're pretty familiar with that one.
We've talked about it quite a few times in just this series alone, right?
Okay, and well, this definition comes from dictionary.com. So again, this isn't the law definition. Mm-hmm. This is just a social definition. Any written or positive rule or collection of rules prescribed under the authority of the state or nation.
Okay, right. So, and we know that, right? Most of us are law-abiding citizens. Hopefully one day we get to all of us. But the laws have to make sense too, right? Which is a part of our issue as an indigenous population. But, let's read the definition of law maybe a little bit simpler. Because, again, I'll read it as, from a legal perspective, right? A rule of or conduct or action laid down and enforced by a supreme governing authority, as in legislation, right, of a community or established by a custom, right? The whole collection of rules, right? So the United States rules, the United States laws. Unfortunately, they subjugated indigenous rules and indigenous laws. But these laws are what is used to, what's the word I'm looking for?
I'm not sure.
To promote dominance of one group over another, right? We're going to tell you what to do, and it's the law that dictates that this is who we are, right? Before we get into the laws that they used as a part of this discrimination tactic, let's read the other two. Let's read custom and let's read what political power is, and then we'll start getting into it a little bit.
Okay, all right. Well, for custom, we got this one from Oxford.
Okay.
Okay. And it says a mode of behavior or procedure which is widely practiced and accepted and typically long established in a particular society, community, etc.
Okay.
So
Right.
mode of behavior, the way the people act.
Yeah, right. What's normal? Granted, Jim Crow was a custom, right? And so we're not really getting into that yet, right? We're just explaining what a custom is, defining what customs are, so that we can really have a really good discussion on this stage. And so the last one was political power. And so let's define political power.
Well, do we want to define it now? Because we may want to wait and really give the full definition of it when we really begin to talk about it, because that definition was way long.
Okay, so, all right, so we're going to talk about laws, we'll talk about customs, and then, we'll explore political power. And I think that you can already see that this show is going to be very interesting, and it's a lot to explore, right? And so the point of this show is to discuss the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian and how these stages affect not just who we were, but who we are, and it's affecting what we can be moving forward, right? And that is the genocide of us in effect still today. And so we're using this show to outline that. And so let's talk about some of the laws, right? Because that was the first thing that they used with respect to discrimination. Let's talk about some of the laws that they put together and used that would showcase the discrimination of darker-skinned indigenous peoples.
Well, we know initially there were basically rules that people were just following, okay? And a lot of these rules that they were coming up were basically dealing with Christianity. And again, because Christianity was a big thing that was being propagated, But again, that was supposed to be the big, where you could come here and be free to
practice your religion.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Well, yeah, that's what the pull was initially, to come to the Americas, right?
Yes.
Freedom of religion.
Right. Freedom of religion.
Isn't that part of the Constitution still today?
Well, I suppose.
Okay. And that's where laws and customs.
The separation of church and state. Yeah.
Okay. Well, another conversation for another day. But
yes.
Okay, so. The laws that begin to discriminate, again, we talking about the founding fathers heavily invested in the Christian religion and the need for their freedom to practice that religion.
And so then they were saying that if you were a Christian, then you could not be a slave. Okay. And so, so what do you think started happening? A lot of people started taking,
They started becoming Christian.
They started becoming Christians so that they wouldn't be.
Started getting baptized quickly, huh? And actually, that was, and again, a story for another day. But we talked about missions, right? And that was a way to, have the missions be successful, because the mission is to Christianize, right?
Right. And the missions were the big things with the Spanish. The Spanish were doing the missionizing, but when the British came in, the British were they were no longer missionizing, and so that was a big thing there in the South, because now with the British coming in, and they're more focused on the colonization.
Right. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember, some of the first people to be sold in the Virginia colonies had Christian names already, so they had already been baptized into the religion. And so, as far as Spain was concerned, they were not allowed to be slaves at that point, or at one time, Spain didn't allow that either.
Well, and the thing is that if we realize that even those first ones that were brought onto the shore of the what would become the United States, that it was not servitude. It was not slavery at that time.
Okay.
So even the ones that were brought in, they even see where they were, that after 10 years or so, that they no longer see them being a slave.
Yeah, just a functional aspect of the community that they now exist in.
Right, just like what most indentured servants did, which is really what they became when they first landed. Those first ones were indentured servants, and so they served their time, and then after that, they were free.
Okay, this is actually a really good spot for us to take a break, because when we get back, we can actually start listing some of the laws that actually started to change those indentured servants into lifetime servants, right? And then how they used, discrimination tactics to single out which group that would be the slave. And so I hope you are enjoying the show so far, excuse me. We'll be right back with more discussions with Indigenous education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education. Greetings, and welcome to Indeed's Moments in Indigenous Education, which focuses on historical facts which have been omitted or forgotten. Please join us for today's topic. Today's topic: Indian slavery and Africans. Omission, not distortion, is the far more serious culprit in hiding the story of the Black Indians of the Americas. That quote by William Loren Katz from his book entitled Black Indians doesn't even begin to explain the enormity of omission of the dark-skinned indigenous people of the United States. One of the largest omissions is the Native American slave trade and the hundreds of thousands who were enslaved on the mainland or shipped out of the country. Many were shipped well into the 18th century to the West Indies under the guise of punishment, since there were laws in place at that time against Indian slavery. These slaves, once in the West Indies or on the plantations of the South, would blend in with the other people of color being enslaved. So the islands and southern plantations inhabited not only enslaved Africans, but also dark-skinned Native Americans and the descendants of the original Native Americans who got doomed to perpetual slavery. Greetings. I'm Red Silver Fox, co-founder of Indeed Indigenous Education, and I would like to invite you to visit InDedushop.com. That's InDedushop.com, and help support our mission to educate the public of the omitted history of the brown and dark-skinned indigenous population of the Americas. And as always, we would like to thank you for your support.
Welcome back to Discussions with Indigenous Education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian. Right before the break, we were starting to get into the laws and how these laws were used as discriminatory tactics and how that classifies as a stage of genocide perpetuated against a darker-skinned indigenous population. And we talked about the Spanish exploration, and not a lot, just mentioned it right before the break. And now we have to concentrate on the British interaction with then not just the indigenous populations, but all of the colonizers that are coming in and out and what's happening to them. So let's list some of the first laws that was established here in the United States and highlight that, show and highlight that those discriminatory tactics actually occurring against this population.
Yes, now, again, for those of you that are familiar with what was going on in the America, or what became the United States at the time, they know that the British are really starting to move in when the Spanish are really moving further and further south and really kind of end up in the Florida area. You know, so as the British are starting to move in, some of them are even starting to move in from the islands, you know, and starting to establish their plantations and things on the mainland, moving from the islands onto the mainland. And so as they do that, they're bringing their people with them also. So all of this activity is going on, you know. So again, they're starting to figure out things, I guess.
They're starting to establish their governing structure.
Yes, yes. So so one of the first things that they wanted to do is to show that, okay, you know what, we want to work with these Indians, okay. So they have a law, and again, these are the first laws that were enacted were in Virginia. So this is one that was enacted in 1655, okay, and it says that we will not use them as slaves, but do their best to bring them up in Christianity, civility, and the knowledge of necessary trades, okay, and again, this is that this did not stop them from being used as slaves. Okay, all right. And again, like we were saying, that even more of them are even starting to come in from the islands. And so now we're starting to get a mixture of all of these different people now. One's coming in from the islands, the other people that are already on the mainland.
Okay. And so that was the beginning. Here's a law that says, okay, we're not going to use these people as slaves. A couple years later, they develop another act.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, this is in 1670.
Okay.
Okay. And now this time, what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it a lifetime servitude. They're trying to make that normal. They're just trying to normalize that.
Okay.
Okay. So the act in 1670 says, "It is resolved and enacted that all servants not being Christians imported into this colony by shipping shall be slaves for their lives. But what shall come by land shall serve, if boys or girls, until 30 years of age, if men or women, 12 years and no longer."
All right. And so that's 1670. And so we're setting you up here. We just follow us for a moment. You know, you're about to get while we're going through these particular ones. And so again, we're starting at 1655. Natives are going to be Christians. We're going to Christianize them. We're not going to use them as slaves. 15 years later, 1670, and okay, now we're only going to slave the ones that we're shipping again, right? We're not going to use the ones on the mainland, basically.
Oh, well, no. We're going to use them both. Okay. But remember, the ones that come in, they're going to be slaves for their lives if they come in by the ship.
And they only going to be 30
If they're on the land, yeah, they only get, and if, 12 years and longer, okay, until, okay, wait a minute. If boys or girls until 30, okay, if men, okay, that is, yeah, you're right. Yeah, so this is only if they're coming in by the ships. This is what it is.
All right.
Okay.
And so now it's 12 years later, right? It's 1618. And
1682?
I'm sorry, well, I keep going backwards. 1682. Let's read the law that they enacted 12 years later.
And not only was this enacted 12 years later, but this is where they also made it so they changed the terminology so that they're now calling it Negroes and other slaves.
And so now here comes the discriminatory tactics from this moment on to show and highlight how, you know, brown-skinned people aren't able to identify as indigenous today. it can, it's, through a law can start here, right? And let's read this law and highlight and show them what it says.
Yeah, and again, it's not just Negroes.
Well,
Okay.
let's read it. Let's show them. It tells them themselves. Read it.
Okay. And be it further enacted that all servants shall be brought or imported into this country, either by sea or land, whether Negroes, Moors, mulattoes, or Indians, and all Indians which shall hereafter be sold by our neighboring Indians, or any other trafficking with us as for slaves, are hereby adjudged, deemed, and taken to be slaves to all intents and purposes, any law, usage, or custom to the contrary notwithstanding.
All right. And so again, you know, here goes the discriminatory tactics beginning to emerge, right? You know, it's one thing interesting that the Negro, the Moor, the mulattoes, or the Indians, they all have something very similar in common.
Can you guess what that is?
Yeah, the color of their skin, right? And so, okay, so now they're grouping, everybody can be a slave, right?
Everybody can be a slave, but now if you come by boat, then you're a slave for life. But if you're by land,
Until you're 30, or if you're already an adult, 12 years. Okay.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education.
Okay, yeah, and again, you know, like we just said, they all were the same color. But let's look at what happened after this law. Like, what happened to the population, and how how were the laws and the customs established with respect to slavery after this law was established?
yeah, basically what started happening is that they started creating laws, laws to manage the colonists, okay? And so then with the indigenous people, or then with the darker skinned people, if any of them got caught up in the law, then many times the punishment for them was to get sent out of the colony.
Okay, and so they were sent down to the islands and then got involved in the slave trade themselves.
Yes, well, some of them.
Okay.
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 Because, well, we have one right here, where it was says that, and I'm going to read this, a list of Negroes imported into Virginia between 1710 and 1718 by sea includes at least 69 Indians, mostly from the Carolinas. So we have to realize that when slaves were being brought in by ship, that some of them were Indians even from the mainland. Some of them were the indigenous people right from the mainland. Some of them were the indigenous people from New England that would then get shipped down into Virginia. Some of them were from South Carolina getting shipped up into New England. Some of them were coming from Louisiana getting shipped down. But again, anybody that arrived by boat was then considered an African or a slave for life. And so that's what started happening.
Okay. Right. And I wanted to read this last statement, and this is like a legal statement, you know. And I wanted to read this statement because it verifies what's happening today with respects to who controls the identity of what an Indian is, right? And it says, in determining whether a person is considered to be an Indian under the laws mentioning but not defining an Indian. See, there is no law defining.
Right.
They can only say, okay, this is what
parameters.
This is what we consider to be. And the courts have heeded to the recognition by the tribe or society of Indians and the recognition by the federal government as expressed in a treaty or a statute. Meaning that if the United States doesn't state that these people are Indian, then legally they're not allowed to be called an Indian, right? And so that begs another issue when we talked about it in the last episode, when the law states that if you are colored, then you are African, right? Or that you're a slave, and if you're a slave, then you're considered African. Where we just mentioned that 69 people from Carolina went to Virginia and were sold as slaves. And so,
right, and so now they're and once they came in, only Africans are slaves.
Right. And so again, these are where the discrimination and you know how law was used to hide, to subjugate, to influence the identity of this population. And now today, you know, we have a difficult time, being recognized in our proper person, because they've been taught that we don't exist, right? And they would be able to do that through the laws, right? And so that is lost. There was laws, there were customs, and there was political power with respects to the discrimination, right? And so let's take a break here, and when we get back, we can talk about the custom portion of discrimination, define it one more time, and maybe use some points on the history to highlight how the custom was discriminatory, right? Hint, hint, Jim Crow. We'll be right back with more discussions with Indigenous education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education on PhillyCam. Today's topic, Indian slavery laws. Slavery in the Americas, especially in the United States, is a highly toxic subject in which history has not been very kind. Because of its toxicity, it is a subject that routinely gets circumvented. What is even more elusive is the topic of Indian slavery. But if one took a look at colonial laws, history cannot deny that Indians were used as slaves. As early as 1682, Virginia had a law that stated, quote, "All Indians which shall be sold by our neighboring Indians, or any other trafficking with us for slaves, are hereby adjudged, deemed, and taken to be slaves," end quote. Another 17th century Virginia law included Indians in the terminology Negroes and other slaves. In South Carolina, their slave code of 1740 stated that, quote, "All Negroes and Indians, mulattoes or mestizos, who now are or shall hereafter be in this province, and all their issue and offspring, born or to be born, shall be, and they are hereby declared to be, and remain forever hereafter, absolute slaves," meaning that all Negroes, Indians, and their children were slaves for their lifetime. The only exceptions to this law were mulattoes and mestizos who were already free, and Indians in amity with the government, or in other words, Indians whose tribe had a treaty with the government. The South Carolina Slave Code served as the model for other colonies in North America. In 1770, Georgia adopted the South Carolina Slave Code, and then Florida adopted the Georgia Code. All of the colony's early slave codes were basically congruent, which is clear evidence that Indians were used as slaves in all of the founding colonies. You have just finished watching Indeed's Moments in Indigenous History. Please join us next time. Peace.
It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on the replay. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one.